like your boyfriend seeing me braless in the dorm? Then he won't. I live on an all-female floor in a college dorm. Normally, I wear a bra if I'm leaving the building, but I'm not about to throw one on just to walk down the hall to the bathroom. A few days ago, I stepped out of my room, walked about 10 yards to the water fountain, filled up my water bottle, and went back to my room. I was wearing a white tank top with no bra underneath. The tank was fitted, but not see-through, so you could only make out the outline of my nipples. There was a small group of people hanging out in the hall, but I didn't think much of it. That is, until about half an hour later, when I heard a knock on my door. It was one of the girls I'd seen in the hall. She said something like, "Hey, I'm so sorry to ask this, but if you go out in the hall again, could you put a bra on?" My boyfriend's out there, and he was staring a bit, so I'm not good at confrontation, so I just said, "Yeah, sure, sorry about that," and made sure to wear a bra or a sweater every time I left my room after that. That should have been the end of it. But apparently it wasn't. The next day, my roommate told me she overheard the girl talking to a few friends in the bathroom. The girl was making it sound like I'd intentionally tried to seduce her boyfriend, walking around in barely anything, taking my sweet time at the water fountain, sticking out my chest for effect. My roommate said the girl even started acting it out, pretending to be me at the fountain. That night, as I was heading to brush my teeth, again in my pajamas, no bra, I passed the girl and her friends in the hall. She looked down at my chest, and all of them started giggling. But the final straw came yesterday when the RA sent out an email to the entire dorm. Apparently, she'd received some anonymous complaints about people dressing inappropriately in the hallways and asked us all to keep things covered up. Now, here's where I got my little bit of petty revenge. I knew that the girl's boyfriend didn't go to school here. We had been in the same orientation group and talked a bit. I also knew that because of the pandemic, we weren't allowed to have non-student or family guests in the dorms this year. So, I used the same anonymous complaint form to report people bringing their off-campus boyfriends into the dorm and not wearing masks. Masks are required in the hallways, though not always enforced. This morning, the RA sent another email stating that due to anonymous complaints, they'd be enforcing the no off-campus guests rule by checking IDs for unfamiliar guests from now on. Honestly, this girl should be thanking me. If she was worried about her boyfriend seeing even the faintest outline of my chest in the hallway, she doesn't need to worry anymore. Apparently, booking a seat on a train is not a real booking if someone else decides to sit there. I was traveling from Edinburgh to London by train and had a booked window seat with a table. I got on the train to find 4 guys sitting at the table. The one in my seat that was clearly marked as booked refused to move as he was with his friends, and the train was packed. The ticket collector passed and I asked him to help. He asked the guy to move, but he refused, and somehow that was that. "So what now?" I asked. "You can find another seat, but I have no power to move him. Only the police can move him, and they will not turn up just to move someone out of a seat." There were no seats free in the carriage, and probably not many free on the train, so standing to London was a possibility. I'm going to take a seat in first class. Better surroundings, power sockets, and free tea and coffee. You can't sit there, you don't have a booking. Well, you could call the police to move me, but apparently they won't turn out to move someone out of a seat. I had a lovely trip with power for my laptop and a wide, comfy seat. Neighbor took my parking spot after I shoveled. I poured water in his windshield. It was a cold winter day. 8 inches of snow had fallen the night before, and the wind chill made it feel as if it were in the negatives. Fahrenheit. I drive an all-wheel drive SUV, so I have no issues getting out. My wife, on the other hand, drives a Prius, which slides with the smallest amount of moisture on the road. My car was down at the time, so we had to take my wife's car. I spent 45 minutes in the freezing cold shoveling that car out so we could get to the store. We were gone for an hour, and when we came back, our neighbor had taken the spot I had shoveled. Our apartment complex doesn't have assigned parking, but in the winter, it's understood that if you shovel a spot, it's yours. So when I saw his car in the spot I had just shoveled, I was pretty pissed. I went inside and filled 2-gallon jugs of water, went back out and poured them on his windshield. Rinse and repeat. I must have poured about 10 gallons of water on his car. Being how cold it was already freezing by the time I poured the last gallon on. It sat like that overnight. The next morning, I got to watch as he helplessly tried to scrape all of these layers of ice off his windshield. Don't take my goddamn parking spot! You want to try to take 9 inches of our property? We'll take 20 feet of yours. We've been living in our house for about 8 years in a rural neighborhood in Arizona. A year ago, a guy from California bought the lot next to us and immediately threw a fit about the stuff we had on our property line. To give some context, we had placed a single fence pole kind of near the property line. It was never meant to be anything permanent, just a temporary marker that somehow became a permanent fixture. This guy was absolutely furious that we had vehicles parked near what he claimed was his property. The very tip of one of our cars was touching the boundary, and he threatened to have our vehicle towed. So, to settle things, we had a real land survey done. Turns out the property line was actually 20 feet into his land. If he hadn't acted like such an ass about a few inches, none of this would have happened. Entitled Parker parked in my driveway, so I blocked them in and got drunk all weekend. Friday night, I came home from work to find someone on our block was having a large party, and someone decided they were entitled to park in my driveway. Keep in mind, my driveway is a single car width, lined with a retaining wall on both sides, and a garage at the end, essentially impossible for a tow truck to come pull them out without property damage. Seeing this, and the lack of street parking, I took this as a cue to park right behind them in my driveway. Now, a few hours go by, and their entitled Parker is now knocking at my door, demanding I move my car so she can leave. Seeing as they were demanding, I informed them that I had been drinking and would not move my car. The entitled Parker then decides to call the police to get them to force me to move. When the police knocked on my door, I was sure to grab a beer from the fridge before I answered to talk to the officer. I had informed him that after I got home, I was unwinding and had been drinking and was in no shape to drive. At this point, their hands were tied because they couldn't tow her car out. I'm in no shape to drive, and I'm legally parked in my driveway. I ended up telling the entitled Parker that since it is a long weekend, I would be on a weekend-long bender, and they could come move my car after I go to work on Tuesday. I exposed an affair because it was affecting my sleep, so I'll start with understanding what I did wasn't exactly right, but I regret nothing. TLDR. My upstairs neighbor is having an affair and it's disrupting my sleep, so I found the wife online and messaged her. Problem solved. My upstairs neighbor has been having an affair with a married man for about 4 months now. I wouldn't care, but because it's an affair, he comes over at odd hours of the night and they have sex very loudly. I can hear a lot, and it wakes me up, prevents me from sleeping. How do I know it's an affair? He's never spent the night, and his car has baby car seats in there. Some backstory, I've had issues with my upstairs neighbor prior to this. She would throw parties on Monday nights. She gets home at 2 a.m. from work pacing her condo and having loud phone conversations. She's 40 years old, throwing parties with 20-year-olds and having affairs, and living like a teenager. I tried to talk to her like a normal person about my concerns, but she doesn't care, and I've had to get the association involved to stop the parties. I hate her. So I decided to learn some more about this mystery man. I looked up the license plate, found an address, searched the address, and found a name. Took the name and did some social media stalking and found the man and his wife's profiles. I made a throwaway account, messaged the wife about the affair. I haven't seen him now for a few weeks, and I'm sleeping really nicely. Edit. People asking, how did you find the address? Website called InfoTracer. Total Wine would not sell me the specific wine I drove 60 miles for because they claimed I was with someone else who left, and they needed to see their ID. I was alone. So I made a mobile order for $10,000 and never picked it up. I was still fuming as I wrote this because of the sheer disrespect I received from Total Wine management. I even have the receipt for my order. So here's what happened. There's a specific wine I like to pair with food, and the closest Total Wine that had it was a 60-mile drive away. It was storming, but I really wanted it for the holidays since I was likely going to be cooped up inside. I drove over. This Total Wine used to be my usual store until I moved 2 counties away, and picked up the wine, along with some other items for holiday parties. I was in there for maybe an hour, and when it came time to check out, the cashier asked for my ID. I gave it to her, but then she said she needed to see the ID of the other person I was with. I was confused and said, "I'm alone." She said she needed to get the manager. Okay, fine. The manager comes out and tells me that the cashier said I was with someone and they needed their ID to complete the transaction. I told him again that I was alone. He asked to see my ID, looked at it, and said, "Well, unfortunately, you look young." At that point, I was beyond frustrated. He told me, "You can come back tomorrow." Alone. I was furious. First of all, I found it incredibly disrespectful for him to say I look young while holding my ID in his hand. Second, I've been shopping at this exact location for 4 years and never had any issues before. I even told him I drove all the way there and that I have a second form of ID, but he just giggled and said no. I left feeling disrespected and had to drive back home in the storm, which took another hour and a half. I was pissed about it all night, but the next day, I went to the Total Wine near my house to get the other items I needed. They were super pleasant, didn't ask for my ID, and everything went smoothly. Clearly, that other location was on some kind of power trip. Then, I received an email from them asking me to review my experience, which I usually ignore. But this time, I decided to write about what happened at the other location. The next day, I got a call from the store manager. It turned out the guy from the night before was just an assistant manager. He was much more pleasant than the woman who called me. She was extremely rude and condescending. She told me they reviewed the cameras and saw someone walk in with me at the same time, so they considered us a party. I told her I didn't know that person, but she said it didn't matter. So apparently, if someone walks into Total Wine at the same time as you, they're automatically considered part of your group? She went on to say that the employees saw that person leave 30 minutes before I checked out. I asked why they didn't mention anything when they saw them leave, and she just said, to complete the transaction, they would have to come back with their ID. That wasn't the point. The point was, they wasted my time by allowing me to shop for another 30 minutes, only to deny me at checkout. And her attitude made it worse. There was no apology or attempt to make up for the inconvenience. I decided to look up their policy, and it clearly states that the rule applies only to parties at checkout, which makes sense. But the whole situation was still annoying. Then, I discovered something interesting. Their policy says that if an online order isn't picked up within a week, they'll issue a full refund. So, my friends and I were sitting around drinking the stuff I picked up at the other location, and I was telling them about what happened. They were all shocked. In a fit of anger, I decided to enforce their own policy on them. I placed a $10,000 mobile order for the soonest possible pickup time. I made sure to order the cheapest, heaviest bottles, so they'd take up the most space in their curbside pickup area, and I ordered 238 bottles of Tito's, knowing it'd be in high demand during the holidays. I also included a lot of bottles behind glass, so they'd have to scramble to grab them. I placed the order, and when I got the confirmation email, it specified that I had to wait for the pickup confirmation email. It also said that the recipient of the order needs to be 21, but it didn't mention anything about people in the car not being 21. 5 hours later, I got the pickup email, and then a reminder email came a few days after that. 7 days later, I got a final notice email. And on day 10, I received a phone call from the manager, who sounded completely different from the woman I dealt with before. She asked when I was coming to pick up the order. At this point, I think she realized I was messing with them because it had been 10 days, and she knew my name from the previous feedback call. I told her I went to pick it up but was told I looked too young, so I just went to the other Total Wine and picked it up there. She was furious and asked, "Are you seriously not coming to pick it up?" I just said, "Nah." She hung up. When they asked why they had to refund me $10,000, I can't wait to hear the explanation. They were supposed to cancel the order at the 7-day mark, but they didn't. I called customer service to cancel it, and they said some stores wait until the end of the month to do it. I suspect the manager was trying to hold out on refunding to improve their numbers. I made them cancel it right then. Oh, I played the long game 7 years ago. I was lucky enough to be able to buy my own place. I had saved for 10 years, worked my ass off. And I was so happy to be able to have a place to call my own. Now, being a single person on the mortgage meant I had to make compromises. One such compromise was buying a property on a shared block. A lot cheaper. Where I'm from, this usually means it's on a strata title. For some, that's a bonus, as it means there's a communal fund for repairs. Typically, insurance is cheaper as it's collective, and other things like maintenance being taken care of. Strata titles also come with a lot of bylaws and restrictions on what you can and can't do. I'm a pretty private and introverted person, so having to deal with people and have limits on how I live was a no-no. I took my time, found the perfect property. Shared block but freehold title. Only thing that was, I needed to pay public liability insurance for the shared walkway on the property, split equally between owners. The real estate agent is local to my area. There's also about 3 degrees of separation between us. He has friends who are friends with my friends type of thing, didn't know him, but knew of him. So that sort of felt good too. About 5 months after I move in, I get a knock on the door from the owner, landlord, of the property next to me to discuss insurance. Not a problem. I ask for a copy of the policy so I have a record. It gets sent through Ann Lowe, and behold, it's for Strata Insurance. I was incredibly confused, and after much back and forth, the property isn't a freehold title, but a strata title. I called my lawyer who conveyed the title, etc. He was dumbfounded, but over it all did the right thing, and made things as right as they could. I arranged for a meeting with the real estate agent. I brought emails and printouts of the ads they had, all saying it was freehold. Emails between the real estate agent and my lawyer discussing its freehold status. Despite it being an absolute black and white, he refused to accept any fault or offer anything to make things right. I don't begrudge that. He's looking out for himself, I get that. However, I wouldn't forget it. I did enter into mediation with the real estate agent, and all I asked for was, when the time came for me to sell, they'd do it or cover the costs. I thought this was reasonable, but they flat out refused, offered me $1,000 to go away, which I refused. I had the option to pursue them legally and was advised by the mediator to do so, but ultimately I decided against it for a few reasons, the main one being my health at the time. So I planned and plotted, and I schemed and connived as to how to get back at this son of a bitch. And I settled on this. I found his personal Facebook page, which wasn't set to private, saw some photos of a boys on tour trip he went on a few weeks prior, so about 5 to 6 months after I bought the property. I also found his address through a business registration search. On the anniversary of the sale, for 6 years straight, I sent them flowers with a note. Dear real estate agent, remembering you on this our special day. She has your eyes. Love, Elle. They varied ever so slightly over the years, but always had on this our special day, and some weird inference to a love child and a desire to reconnect. I also from time to time arranged for postcards and letters to be sent from another country. The one he was on tour in always signed Love, Elle. I learned about 3 weeks ago that this guy had recently divorced, lost his home, and is no longer working as a real estate agent. His wife had found out he cheated on her. The story I was told, through said friends of friends, went along the lines of, he would get weird gifts and flowers every year, same day, every year. She, his wife, finally put 2 and 2 together and realized what the date was, and he admitted to cheating on her. Now, I didn't mean for this, but it turns out a year before I bought my house, he had gone on holiday, came back with an STD, gave it to his wife, but somehow convinced her that it wasn't him. As such, our special day turned out to be right around the time he'd have been balls deep, sans condom, in someone who wasn't his wife only 1 year earlier. He's apparently lost his house, half his retirement savings, and also his business. I do feel a little bit guilty about all of it sometimes, but then I'm reminded that he's a scumbag, and that karma, like me, is a patient, spiteful, and vengeful bitch. Well, how do you like the stories? Share your opinion in the comments. I'll be happy to read it. Until next time with stories, and please don't forget to like. Bye-bye.